I okay to go to the next slide? Or? Oh, perfect. No. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't go too fast. So, under the first really pillar of this plan, you have the values of the community, which are the first three big goals. And so those topics really, again, kind of emphasize on livability, public art, and inclusive recreation. Big goal 2 emphasizes more on community involvement and kind of how to get the community more in the process. So, for instance, applications to boards or commissions, or just how can we do some more volunteer type programs, things of that nature. And then big goal 3 deals more with safety and security for police. One of the things that you'll notice that's kind of been added in there is SEPTED. That's kind of a new program that staff felt was important to, I guess, emphasize on, as that's something that would be new to the city. That would be a new program, but ultimately SEPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. And so that's where you really cross-pollinate between development services and the police as new commercial or new residents, new subdivisions come about. That's something where you're looking not only to the code of what already exists, but how to prevent crime, whether it be lighting or landscaping or the way the street is set up or oriented towards the street. Just another way to provide safety and security for the residents of Raymore. And to the next kind of slide, so that you'll see the 4 goals under the image of the city. So big goal 4 deals heavily with the land use component of the plan, and so that's something that I'll get a little bit further into detail. Again, we're kind of at that 5,000 foot view. For big goal 5, you're talking about housing type and the different types of quality neighborhoods, universal design, things of that nature, to where that'll be actually something that Mr. Gress covers just after I finish up on my portion. Big goal 6 is transportation and connectivity, public infrastructure, things of that nature, which is also part of the presentation tonight. Mr. Gress had really hit well on, we have very young infrastructure, but how do we maintain that and keep it viable for the next 20 years and really even on past that. And then we go to prosperous economic growth. And so this is going to be your different types of economic development tools, looking at growth commercially and how we can support future subdivisions coming into the city, as well as just promoting really state, local, and regional organizations to support that development, whether it be workforce development or things like for the Raymore Commerce Center. How can we help those community partners grow and prosper within the city? And finally will be the last 2 goals, big goal 11 and 12. So this is, if you think more internally, this is more staff driven. So your HR, court, IT, those types of departments kind of fall under this section of the goals. As this comprehensive plan is a little bit different than most, we wanted to be completely transparent as not only just providing service for external customers, but for also internal customers as well. So when you think of the comprehensive plan, it's a plan of all plans, and so wanted to emphasize that and really hit it home with goal 11 and 12. And wanted to pause here before I go on.
So Dylan, I'll just talk about the elephant in the room. Big goal number 5 talks about housing. One of the biggest questions that we as elected officials get is about how do we prioritize the type of housing that's coming to our community. We don't necessarily always know how many plans come to you guys, because you have I think you have a feel for what the elected body wants or needs, even planning and zoning to a certain extent. But I think when we get down to the housing variety, you have it outlined here, what the breakdown for the 10,375 dwelling units that presently exist. And I don't have, you didn't apply percentages to that. I mean, we could easily do that with a calculator, but I was just kind of curious from the perspective of the input and from our, of the citizens and from our consultants, is there a touch point that looks like it's be receptive to our community, the majority of our community, with regard to those percentages. I know that people are concerned about more rental units. People are more concerned about multi-family housing units coming to the community, given the burst of growth we've had in the last 5 or 6 years. So I'm just kind of curious from staff's perspective, how you see that particular goal moving forward.
Give us
Okay.
about 10 slides, sir,
10 slides and we'll be there?
and we'll be there.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, we're actually gonna, we've got a couple of
Do a
different
deep dive
points.
on that.
And then at a later date, I don't want to spoil the thunder, but yes, we're actually gonna address that here, sir.
Okay.
And I will give my apologies. I should have thought a little further ahead and printed this presentation out for the council. I'll certainly follow up after tonight's meeting so that you have a chance to look at it more closely. But as Mr. Fearborn mentioned, we will absolutely cover that here in just a few moments.
All right, okay, thank you.
So I apologize. You'll have to indulge me for the couple of slides here. So kind of onto the market analysis. Mr. Gress kind of already highlighted this in a few slides before this, but really as we talk about the land use and into our housing discussion, keep this slide in mind because this is essentially what the consultant in market research is telling us that we can support for the next 20 years. And so you've got your just about 11,000 to 12,000 new residents, 5,000 to 5,700 new housing units, and a bunch of commercial, as well as just really all that spanning over 13 to 1,400 acres within the city. So we're going to be on page 83 for anyone who's kind of following along. Oh, shoot, I went one too far. I apologize.
You're right. So before Mr. Ruppert gets into this, I wanted to kind of preface what the real estate and market analysis looked at. We'll touch on the housing here in just a second, but as it relates to the land use and kind of commercial development, these were the 3 findings that the report provided to us about basically our commercial economy. And it's that, in general, since 2010, we have operated at a very low vacancy rate for our commercial spaces, which is very good because we don't have a lot of empty spaces sitting there empty. But it presents a challenge, and as you can see on the second point, is that it's a shortage of retail space available for immediate occupancy, and which is a barrier in some cases to newer, smaller businesses coming to town who can't, we work with larger developers who can build all the infrastructure and fill in themselves, and we also have a lot of conversations with local businesses who cannot necessarily do that on their own. And so one thing here that was pointed out to us is that it's a double-edged sword. We don't have a lot of vacant space, but we also don't have a lot of vacant space. And so as Mr. Eppert's about to kind of get into, we can obviously support with our growth a lot more space of commercial development. And all those things aside, the different factors that that report looks at tells us that people aren't finding all the things they need here in Raymore all the time. They always have to, or in some cases have to leave Raymore to go do those things. And so the basis of what Mr. Eppert is kind of working on with this section is knowing where the amount of growth that we can support, where within the city should we be focusing that development, what within those larger tracts of land that we'll talk about, how much of those should be filled up with certain types of land uses and so forth. But this slide within the market research was what kind of was highlighted for our economy, is that we can definitely be supporting more and more commercial development.
So on page 53, that's kind of our future land use map, which you'll find about 30 new kind of, we say cleanup items, but when we say cleanup items, it's property that's been developed and rezoned, and so the future land use has obviously changed from maybe what it was once to what it is currently being used for. So looking through the GMP that was originally approved back in 2013, those have not changed, and so we wanted to update that and clean those items up. We also identified 2 additional new future land use designations, one being rural residential and the other being activity centers. So just touching on rural residential real quick, to the north, really border of Raymore, kind of south of 150, and really the large swaths of land that are kind of to the east of Kurzweil, those are all going to be areas that are support very low density residential. So you're talking 3 to 5 acre lots and nothing supported by sanitary sewer, as there's no sanitary sewer infrastructure that exists in that area. So everything that you'll have out there will be on private septic systems. then kind of transitioning to the activity centers, we've identified 5 activity centers within the city, kind of all sporadic, some to the east, some to the west, some to the north, and really one right here as we're sitting. The first one's going to be Municipal Circle, and so obviously that's right here, and you'll kind of notice up at the front of the dais there where there's a bunch of different concept plans that have been drawn up by our consultant. But the first one is Municipal Circle, and the original idea for Municipal Circle was to be a downtown. And obviously, as things have developed or not, it's been really determined that we sit too far off of 58 Highway, and so the visibility to Municipal Circle has kind of been a detriment in that area, but has transitioned to more of a civic center. And so you've got City Hall here, you've got the state to the south of us, we've got a couple of lots that the city actually owns here in Municipal Circle. Different ideas, whether it be a post office or a library, things of that nature, to keep it more of a civic type center with maybe more local businesses and medium density residential, whether that be like small scale apartments or something of that nature. Transitioning kind of to Fox Ridge Village, so that's the 40 acres that is directly south of Willow Wind. We already have a little bit of infrastructure in that area, but the barriers that exist, which are kind of a positive and a negative, are going to be the stream buffers. So within that, they're protected stream buffers, but at the same point, definitely provide a lot of land to be able to kind of have that 58 frontage, so a good commercial, residential type use. So what we call, for us in development services, it's a great mixture of residential and commercial uses. And so have had a little bit of interest in the property. Definitely something that we have seen as more of a downtown area. But obviously bringing it for you all for feedback and input on what you all might see in that area as well.
Yeah, no, it's.
Stop
open
me
for
whenever.
comment.
You know, I was reading all of this on the Municipal Circle, the downtown thing, and a concern I have and a concern from a lot of people I've talked to is we've got a tremendous facility in Centerview, but if that's at capacity, we don't have any place to park. And I mean, as we're trying to develop this Municipal Circle, it's even going to put more need, draw more people, more things for parking. I really didn't see anything addressed like that where are we going to make some of these lots dedicated to parking? Is there going to be a parking? As you build some of these things, have parking garages? I mean, how are we going to handle making that so it's an attractive thing to come to and not have to park so far away or not be able to find a parking space because you got a big event or something?
So one thing, so this Municipal Circle is one of the only properties that we looked at that already has kind of an approved plan with it. It's the City Center Overlay District, and then there's the Municipal Complex Design Standards that were adopted when City Hall and all the lots here were developed. It's actually one of the only areas of the city that promotes shared parking. And so you'll see in those covenants, it's that, you know, the City Hall parking lot is open to people during the day, even if they're not coming to City Hall. The parking requirement there at Centerview was calculated based on all the street parking that we added when we reconfigured Municipal Circle. We find a lot when we talk to people that it's sometimes it's about the lack of parking, but sometimes it's about the distance of the parking. And that I can't think of the number of spaces off the top of my head here on Municipal Circle, but you know, we dealt with it when we had a chamber event at Centerview here a few weekends ago, and you know, it's the perception that walking from the front parking lot to Centerview is a mile long, and when it's hot outside, it certainly seems like that. But one thing that we're looking at really with Municipal Circle, and then we can touch on it with the S-curve of 58, if you will, is when you start talking about a downtown, and the reason that we chose to focus on that activity center concept is that if you look in a lot of the feedback we've gotten from the residents in the community conversations and some of our other exercises is that people want a downtown. And we have TB Hanna that is kind of the remnants of our downtown with the park, functions really well. But what you don't see in a lot of downtowns is an excess of parking like you would see at the Raymore Galleria, for example. And so we look at things like shared parking, on-street parking where it makes sense. We actually even have had a conversation about a parking garage here at Municipal Circle many years ago. And so it's not so much that, we're not here to solve the problem of parking here, but it's certainly something we can look at as we look at other overlay districts that we would look at for some of these areas. Because the challenge with parking is that the more parking you have, the less space you have for commercial uses, for things that make a downtown. But I know here the thing that we often see with Municipal Circle is that I liken it to voting day. I think we see a lot of traffic here on election day. But I think the perception that we try and battle is it's not necessarily the amount of parking, but it's how much parking is right there at the front door versus how many people prefer to walk or not walk to a parking spot. But I think you'll find that the question you have asked would really only apply to Municipal Circle and then that S-curve where we're trying to make that downtown from something that's already existing. The other ones, as you'll see, are the large acreages of land where if we're going to develop it as something new, we could develop a new downtown and think about things like parking and where that's put. So hopefully that answers your question. I know we wrote that down as maybe a topic of consideration as we look at
And
those
I mean,
tools.
I was kind of bringing that up because sometimes you can remodel a house so many times that it becomes unfunctional. And it might be that instead of trying to create a downtown where we have already, it might make sense to create, a whole different part of the city that becomes the city center or downtown. And that's why it's just bringing that up, because the parking's a challenge.
So we're gonna move on to the Raymore Gateway, which is located kind of north of Go Car Wash, Scooters Coffee, kind of that larger swath of land, and it's actually bisected by Westgate Drive. So to the west and to the east are owned by the same people, but the west side would be more of a redevelopment type opportunity where there's already a couple of barns that exist and a couple of duplexes as well. But to the east is also completely undeveloped, definitely looked at as an area for an entertainment type district with some, kind of high density apartments or commercial retail, a mixture of those types of things. And then what you'll notice is in all these activity centers, we're essentially promoting a mixed use development. So you're going to see residential and commercial, but just depending upon the size is how much that site can actually accommodate. The Good Ranch mixed-use project, which is what we call the Pork Chop. So this is going to be kind of north of North Cass Parkway and directly east of I-49. So it's about 170 acres, which right now is completely zoned for commercial. And so that's, in staff's mind, is too large to completely support only commercial development. And so that's something, again, where we're looking for a good mixed use, whether it be, a hotel or, kind of I think in years past, there's been a concept for maybe soccer fields or something of that nature where it's completely privately owned, but something that the city would support. And obviously, there's a concept plan within the comp plan to kind of show different layouts or thoughts that we've kind of rendered to you all for your input and feedback. The last one is kind of interesting just because we call it the S-curve, but it's a Central 58 corridor. It's more of a redevelopment opportunity as opposed to an undeveloped piece of land where you're kind of building it from ground up. Obviously, the ground already exists, and there's just a few kind of missing parcels that have been undeveloped, but for the most part was really kind of the original commercial corridor. And so how do we revitalize that to bring more development to the east side of town? I know in several planning commission meetings we've heard, it seems like we've forgotten the east side of town, and that is by no means and really far from the truth. We want that area to develop, but it's definitely taken this comp plan to kind of get us to that point and look at really how we want to develop and do it right the first time as opposed to look at it a couple different times. Wanted to pause before I go too much further on this.
I think one thing I wanted to add to further explain why these concepts are in front of you for consideration. One thing that we see in our department is a lot of the parcels you have up here are large swaths of undeveloped land. Each of them has two very prime corners that people are always very interested in. And what we see is that the first two users that get to those corners get their approvals, they build what they build, and then the rest of everything just sits there as an afterthought. We've seen that on a couple of projects recently, and we always try to discourage that. So one thing we're trying to accomplish with these different concepts, and they're by no means the approved plan of the city, but they're meant to communicate the idea of what the city wants to see there. But one thing we're trying to get to a point of requiring is that when somebody looks at any of these 5 different properties, they're going to be required to go through a true master plan, so they don't just get the 2 prime corners and then fill everything else in between. We've seen that a lot lately with some of these properties, and fortunately, we've been able to kind of push the pause button until we can go through that process. But as Mr. Eppert was mentioning, each one of these really supports a various mix of uses, but none of them really functions well if we let the frontage go and don't pay any mind to the back of the property. It's not always prime commercial land, and so that could be something that's not good for the future of the city in any respect. And so that hopefully explains why these concepts are in front of you. Is we realize that we're very lucky to have these huge pieces of land in the middle of the city to help us support the growth that we're really poised to have. But without this type of thinking, we just felt that we would be down a path that would be very hard to right the ship if we went down a path that wasn't so desirable. And the thing with zoning is that if it's zoned for something, there's a path forward to get to the end. So hopefully that kind of explains, again, these are by no means the approved plans that we're seeking the approval on tonight. But in terms of the concepts and the mixture of uses and the percentage of land uses in each of them, hopefully that kind of makes sense as you look at each one of them throughout the city. At future full build out by 2045, is this a good snapshot of how the council would see the city as a whole and those individual pieces looking, or are there other things that we need to be looking at?
And I'll throw this in here, I don't know where the right place, but as we're talking about this, and especially like the stretch of the Good Ranch up there on 49, you know what I've seen across, I mean, we've got a big metropolitan area, everybody's competing, you know, for the business and things like that, and it seems like when these developers come in, you know, they're just kind of coming in and putting in the same thing, looks just like what they did in Lee Summit or Blue Springs or this or that. And it's like, I really believe that we need to create a market that is unique to us, to where we're selling that to developers. An example, a great study that you could look at is New Albany, Ohio, outside of Columbus. This area, you know, it was kind of like Raymore, a bedroom community. It was like, you know, a lot of just hodgepodge. And they basically created a design for the community. Basically, everything looks like kind of a combination of two things. Everything looks like it's colonial, even though it's a brand new building, even like the Bob Evans and everything. And then everything else, like around the highways, even their big business centers like we have out here, the big warehouses, they've got these beautiful white fences surrounding everything. You think you're going through Kentucky or whatever. That area now has become one of the richest areas in Ohio. I mean, Abercrombie & Fitch, Bed Bath & Beyond, all these companies have moved their world headquarters there. And the housing, the apartments, I mean, you know, it almost looks like modern, you know, colonial thing, but they're drawing all kinds of business, even industry and everything like that, because even the people that have the big warehouses industry want to live there. And to me, it would seem like if we took one section of our town, which could be that Good Ranch area or something there by North Cass Parkway, and instead of doing like everybody else does and necessarily have, you know, a bunch of sports complex or big box stores or things like that, create a personality for it and market that and get developers that come out and say, hey, I can see value in this. And, you know, I just don't know if that's something that's really been discussed or talked about, trying to create a personality for Raymore from a market standpoint to get this development that doesn't look like everybody else.
So I think what you'll find, maybe as we get into the implementation, is given the information here, the question we have is, assuming this plan gets adopted, there's still a lot to be done because this, while the comp plan regulates development, it doesn't regulate development like the zoning code would. And so you'll find in our zoning code, we have the city center overlay district here at Municipal Circle. That has a number of design requirements, things like the brick on Centerview, and there is a cohesive theme of Municipal Circle. We have also a gateway commercial overlay district that has always been intended to be used for like the Gateway property or the Good Ranch. And even that has another set of design criteria that a building has to meet. We've never had the opportunity to use those because we haven't seen any development really materialize. But I think what you'll find is what you're saying, I think, is where we're headed. Because assuming this plan gets adopted, then a goal is to obviously update our zoning code to be in line with what this is saying. Those are, a little bit ways down the road after we get through this. But I think you're kind of saying where our thoughts have been is that, we don't want these key properties to be just another strip center like we can find in any other city. We don't know what the different thing is that will accomplish that, but I think the feedback you're giving is kind of what we were hoping for tonight is the identity of each of these centers. Did we get it right with the things we put together, or are there other things that we should be adding to these visions?
Like a nice civic center area in that area. I mean, this area could use that because you either have to go all the way to Independence or. A civic center type thing could fit into that mixed use for entertainment, for concerts, for events, either, because right now you either have to go to the Legends, or you have to go to Independence, or you have to go to downtown. I mean, there's nothing really like that, even in South Overland Park or anything. And so, I mean, it's just, to me, it's, I think we got a great opportunity on that 49 corridor and North Cass Parkway to really us not look just like any other city, but people want to come because we've created a vision that's, and sell them our vision versus them trying to sell us their vision. That makes sense. I don't know.
Just a couple more slides. So for the land use and development framework, this really kind of gives you a average growth population or projection in acres just for the types of uses that we have. And so that kind of falls right in between that 1,300 to 1,400 acres. And so this is obviously projections, but just so you can kind of see acreage next to percentage of that certain use or type for the city. Oh, it's a little zoomed in. This kind of gives you a broad overview of just where these activity centers are located, each with kind of the overall acreage that's provided. But just wanted to kind of show you so in total, those 5 activity centers are only 319 acres. So there's still a ton of other area for development if we're still looking to be able to accommodate 1,300 to 1,400 acres of development. So these are really the areas we want to focus on, but at the same point, if there's anything else that we need to focus on, this would be kind of that time to point that out or kind of provide additional feedback that maybe we haven't thought of.
I think the exercise we were going through with this is that we have a lot of holes in the city where there's good infrastructure around it. So from a growth standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to try and fill those voids in the city before we look at expanding outwards, expanding more infrastructure. There's a good section of the plan that touches on annexation and the work that the council's done to kind of prioritize that. But from a development standpoint, the image here up on the screen kind of illustrates what by 2045, this could be the build out of Raymore in this form. It kind of just shows how those voids could be filled in over time with the different types of development.
Well, David, I know that we've talked about each of those areas that are outlined there now on that map that you have up now as a potential site for a downtown build-out. I think we've talked to developers in the past about that possibility. We've even mentioned CIDs with a couple of other developers that wanted us to do all the paperwork, didn't really want to do it themselves, but That dealt with the Central 58 Highway area for redevelopment into a downtown district. We even had previous council members who thought that the pork chop, when there wasn't even a North Cass Parkway there yet, but there was a plan for one, might be a design area for a downtown district. Since we knew that this particular area, the municipal circle area, was limited, and because we are off the main highway, wasn't really designed initially for us to be able to accomplish that, especially with the limited space that we owned in and of itself. Now, we've done a lot with what we have. The services here are excellent. The center view has gone great. It's limited in size, but for what it offers, it gives great housing for our staff of the Parks Department and a great venue for events throughout the day and weekends. So I think we've done a pretty good job of the use of that particular piece of property. But I do feel like the Good Ranch area or the mixed-use village, Fox Ridge Village, and the Central 58, we kind of narrowed it down to those potentially being the three areas that if we could get someone like Councilmember Mills was talking about to really put on their thinking cap and look at those areas as a downtown district, would likely be the most logical places for that. I know we've got some re-interest in Fox Ridge Village. We had some interest in the Good Ranch, but the cost of per square foot has been somewhat prohibitive in interest for that particular area from the landowner themselves. So I don't know if they're going to, if we've had an opportunity to talk to them about how that's kind of limited who we can approach for the development of that property. But the, I don't know, what are the other folks' thoughts here? I do think we do need a downtown identity. Whether any of those three remaining larger sites are capable of handling it, I don't know.
And yeah, you're exactly right, sir. In three of these 5 locations where there is land to start fresh and to try to get a willing developer, a significant challenge that we have on 3 of the 5 of them is the current landowners and the amount that they are wanting to charge for land that is both undeveloped and doesn't have services at it currently. That's the initial challenge you got to get over when you're trying to get a developer to come in here and you're telling the developer kind of think out of the box, and they're going, I can't afford to think out of the box because I'm going to have to pay so much for the box.
And if I could add, I wanted to clarify because we kind of had this discussion at P&Z, if you recall. The answer we're looking for isn't necessarily this one over that one. But if you read kind of the narrative of each of these, it's not how this one could be a better downtown than the other one, but it's how each of these could be their own mini downtown. And it goes back to what I was saying about with either of these, we never want to chop off the 2 corners and just try and figure out what can go in the middle. But I think we kind of got down the rabbit hole at P&Z of which one of these do we want to focus on. Right. So I don't think it's an either or. We can push these aside and worry about this one today. So hopefully our narrative of kind of the characteristics of development and not the individual buildings themselves is what came across. Because that was kind of our point, is that when we are approached by a developer, we don't want them to tell us what they think they're going to do with the property. We want to tell them, here's the parameters of what staff wants to see in it, and you take those items and jumble them up on the paper, and we'll see how it works. But we've dealt with a lot of projects in the past where the developer is in the driver's seat of the conversation, and it's, as I mentioned before, it takes a long time to right the ship when you approach a project like that. And so that was the impetus for some of the discussions that Dylan was mentioning, is that at the end of the day, assuming this gets adopted and the council's supportive of what we've written here with any changes, are the visions correct that we can be communicating to the developers, kind of like Mr. Mills mentioned, whether it's the characteristics of the mixed-use village here or the characteristics of a redevelopment on the S-curve. But I just want to highlight that. We're not looking for focus on this one over the next 5 years.
I understood that.
Are all these things in the right direction?
Mr. Barber, did you have something?
And you guys, this is fantastic. This You guys really put your heart and soul in this. And I understand we're not picking paint colors today, so I understand that. But one of the things, these activity centers, this is like nothing we've ever done here in Raymore. We've got nothing really like this. We're gonna be turning new dirt, right? This is the policy group. Is there any tools you need from this group when you talk about talking to developers and the developers are in the driver's seat? Is there anything we can do from a code or to help you be more in the driver's seat?
So I think the benefit of how we've laid the plan out in terms of its structure is that the land use is tied into the discussions on the zoning, which is related to our discussions on any incentives that we might entertain. But that's kind of what I was getting at, is that there's different tools that we would suggest or propose for the redevelopment of the S-curve, where you've got existing buildings you have to worry about and infrastructure. Different tools that you can use on that site versus what you can use on the Good Ranch, where it's just an undeveloped piece of land. So I don't think today there's any tools we're asking for, but that was kind of our thinking behind this plan, is that when we go to look at the Good Ranch, we want to have a good handle on what tools we can use from a zoning standpoint, from a economic development standpoint. From a parks perspective, for some of our projects, we get park fee in lieu for commercial developments. Should we be looking at parkland on some of these properties where you could intermix some of those uses? So I think those would be the tools, just when we get the interest, assuming the feedback is, or the content of this plan is in line with the council's vision. I think it's the reverse. We're kind of looking for the tools that you all would like to be used for some of these projects. But hopefully that explains the connection of all the different chapters and how we would be using this going forward.
Just a question on that property that's north of Lucy Webb all the way up to Johnson Drive, right on 49. Is that not being considered? I mean, that's like prime real estate, the face of Raymore driving it on the highway. I would not want to put the wrong thing there for.
So we chose to not include that one because it currently has an approved development plan on it, meaning they can move forward with that at any time. The other projects are simply just zoned for this type of development, meaning there's no master plan, there's no preliminary plat, nothing that would provide any direction right now. Certainly we could add that to our review, because I agree with you, Raymore has limited highway frontage. But since that was part of the original Timber Trails development, which is the greater subdivision there, that's why we chose not to focus on that, because there's already some approvals that are in place. And so changing those after the fact, unless that plan expires or what have you, would have some other implications that I think the city would have to think about. But again, as I mentioned before, this is a very high-level project or plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go out tomorrow and rezone that property. Hopefully that answers your question.
On Councilman Barber's comment about, what can we do policy-wise, and I know this is probably going to open a big can of worms, but, we could easily, as we're getting ready to think about making investments on 58 and things like that, we could easily change the face of what Raymore looks like to where it doesn't look like Belton or it doesn't look like anything on the east by putting some nice mediums and making it not just concrete, but putting a whole personality, maybe some nice lights. But all of a sudden, you've entered Raymore, and also it could slow it down a little bit to where as you develop around the S-curve and we develop these things, there's already some kind of a personality there that's separated us already from Belton or, another community. And so I know we're getting ready to talk about investments on 58 and things like that. I mean, this might be the time to have the discussion versus waiting 5 or 6 years and we got a developer wants to come in and now we're tearing out lanes and trying to make that.
And the council did actually charge us 2 months ago with getting the pricing to put the median all the way down 58 for just that.
Not just
No, I understand.
I think if we just put a medium in there, it's not going to benefit the businesses. It's not going to do things. It's not going to create personality. I mean, if we're going to put that medium in there, I think we need to create an identity and personality with it, our art, different things, to where, man, we just came into Raymore. I mean, this is a more of a destination. Doesn't look like Nolan Road or Belton 58 or whatever, is what I'm saying.
Especially as large as that median would be, it would have to have personality.
Excuse me, not to detract from our in-depth discussion on the housing units, but the last part of this discussion is, I think, along the lines of, if you pay close attention to section 4.2, which is our transportation framework.
And I saw that in there.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about, policy now, and that's what I just thought was so
It appears I actually jumped a little too far, because this table is really just the information that was on the map prior to this. So this is kind of all the activity centers with their total acreages and kind of potential uses. And so you're still sitting at the 319 acres, which obviously there's still a lot more land to develop for the next 20 years. So that will conclude my portion. Happy to pause and obviously take on any more questions, but the housing is really next, so.
All right. So again, diving into the housing portion of our our real estate market report, focus a lot on non-residential development just recently, but you'll see here, I said in the beginning of this presentation, how many new dwelling units we can expect to support by 2045. So I wanted to explain a little about how we're planning on getting there. A good chunk of that is from people moving into Raymore, so people choosing to move from another city, buying a house, building a house, what have you, in the city. A smaller portion of that growth, though, is people moving around within the city. So think of either downsizing into a smaller house or upsizing into a bigger house, or moving from an apartment to a single-family home or what have you. But people who are already living in the city who just need to find a different type of housing. So those two factors are generally how we would see our housing growth and population growth over the next 20 or so years. So wanted to dive more into the topic of housing, because that is a kind of a tool that staff relies on. As the mayor mentioned, we have a lot of discussions with people who want to be in Raymore, and we're very good about telling people how they can proceed forward through the processes that the city has, whether or not their project meets the requirements or the guidelines of the city. And so within the comprehensive plan, we did provide a snapshot of where we're at currently with all of our housing units. But the big question we're here to talk about is, what should Raymore's housing stock look like by 2045? Before I go too far, I wanted to kind of explain the different types of housing that we're kind of talking about. And as you can see, I've kind of put the percentages of where we're at right now. So in the far left-hand column, obviously a single-family unit is a detached single-family home. So think of about 70% of Raymore is single-family neighborhoods. Two-family and multifamily units are sometimes kind of lumped into one. Two-family are just going to be your duplex units. So think of some of the villas over at Oak Ridge Farms. We have some right across here on Pine Street, about 500 of those scattered throughout the city. Multifamily units under our code are going to be your fourplexes, sixplexes, sevenplexes, still attached single-family, meaning they are, in terms of how they're constructed, each one of them is their own distinct unit. They just happen to be in a building together. So again, think duplexes and up in terms of two-family and multifamily. Apartment units in our code are kind of their own separate thing in terms of zoning. So in this case, think of the Depot, think of the Lofts, think of Manor Homes of Eagle Glen. So hopefully, as you can see on the totals there, how those different units all add up to one another. People often forget a good chunk of those multifamily and apartment units actually come from Foxwood Springs. There are garden-style units back there, which they have a fairly large amount of, fall under that multifamily classification because they are generally 4 to 6 plexes. And then they have their garden apartments in the middle, which falls under the apartment category. So all those dwellings existing kind of aside, the next table over shows kind of a conservative and a optimistic estimate of just housing units that we can expect to see over the next 20 years, not categorized by any type or any type of use, just here's what we're likely to add over the next 20 years. And so the discussion we'd like to have is with the council on what is your ideal Raymore? How would you like to see those 5,000 or more units filter in to that table that's there? And I wanted to provide this as a starting point. So this was a snapshot that was provided by the market analysis. And think of those numbers in yellow as if Raymore just continued to grow organically based on previous growth, where the market is right now with kind of the living preferences of residents and so forth. If we did nothing and just let Raymore grow organically, this is generally how we would expect to be by 2045. And so you can see with the current housing units, what could likely to be added, what that would equate to in terms of the new housing stock, and then the percentages on the far right. So you can see even that wouldn't yield us too large of a change in terms of the percentages between those different styles of housing. So I wanted to pause with this. The next slide is more or less, those last three columns are blank, and it's just if this trajectory is a little bit different than where the council would like to be, we'd like to kind of continue the discussion of, if not these numbers, if not those percentages, where should those targets be? And so as you'll see, the next slide is what should the housing variety look like if we're going to set those targets. That would be a great tool, as the mayor mentioned, or Councilmember Barber, of a tool that staff could use so that we know, we're having conversations with a developer, what type of housing does the council want to see moving forward? So I'll kind of pause there and entertain any discussion.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Somewhere in the reading I did today, I saw a reference to approximately, we think that there's approximately, of the single-family homes, around 20% of them are being rented as opposed to being owner-occupied. And I know that was included in all of your numbers, and I wanted to say that was good to have that put into there, because that is a significant factor.
So that came from the census, which is, the American Community Survey updates that periodically, but that 80-20 is from the census.
And that is actually going to be one of the bigger challenges that we're going to be talking with the council about in late summer and fall. It is becoming a code enforcement issue with significant numbers of absentee landlords. Some of the ones who are here in town are pressed to take care of more than one property, even if they've bought another property here. Needs to be a topic of discussion, and probably will be the point in time, give the council some time to think about the question marks that are up here, and how do you want to see that growth take place, and actually give us some direction on, as we move forward with developers, what would you like to see these percentages? Not that those are set in stone, again, it's a plan, but where would the council like to see these? Because it would fit into that discussion. It would also fit into the discussion on our economic development policy moving forward as well.
So, David, could you go back to the last slide? So, see, I don't think those are that askew from what might be received by the community as a qualified plan if we were moving forward. And if that were to happen organically, and, you know, we could, if there's somehow we can put something in place, codify something that would give you the authority to say no to additional apartment units if it looks like, you know, over the next 20 years we're moving toward 2,000 instead of 1,000. You know, that it will give you guys a guideline within economic development to kind of strategize that out over the 20-year period, rather than we get, say the pork chop doesn't go commercial. It ends up being all residential, and it all goes, somebody comes in with a huge apartment plan. That would be a skew of what maybe the council might say is acceptable to them. So frankly, I like the, you know, the organic, if that's the way it's organically moving, from my perspective, if we could hold to that, I think that would be palatable by our community. I don't want to see it in one or the other categories going askew. Sure. Maybe single family, maybe a little more of those, but that would be the only one. I think that would be much more palatable by our community if it were to go beyond 72%, say to 80%.
And our goal, when we do have that second discussion with the council on this, would actually be to I wouldn't go as far as to codify it, but actually those numbers would be not only included in this plan, but would be included in the economic development policy. And your terminology is, that's what we would be, you know, if one of these started to go, you know, we saw it creeping 2 or 3% over, council gets a great plan in front of them and they're, you know, well, this includes duplexes, but it's a great mixed use, so we're gonna allow it to go a little bit over. Next person comes in and they're proposing nothing but, you know, a 2-unit duplex. It gives David the direction, hey, look, we're already a couple of percentages points over. Doesn't mean the council's not gonna get it in front of them, but our initial reaction to the developer is gonna be, this is gonna be a little bit tough because we're creeping up over this number.
And to clarify, the good thing about where we're at as a city right now for the topic we're discussing, even all of the activity centers that we have in front of you, all those right now are zoned for just commercial development. So with the exception of the Timber Trails project that the council approved here about a year ago, that's the only unbuilt apartment, non-single family project that is out there. Everything else in the city, if it were to come forward, would have to eventually make its way to the city council for your approval. So we're in a good position there that there's no other approvals. I mentioned that the Timber Trails and the Allaire, I mean, that's still detached single family. But in terms of multifamily or apartments, there are no other approvals that are kind of looming out there that we have to kind of accommodate in our growth. Anything that gets proposed moving forward would be something new that comes to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council for their approval or consideration at least. And so that's where these targets, you know, as Mr. Fairburn mentioned, staff can be thinking, you know, if you're going to propose 400 more apartments, the council may want to see 100,000 more square feet of retail or something to kind of offset that, or any combination of that. We want to see more townhomes here instead of apartments. But I just want to clarify that with the exception of that Timber Trails project, there's no other approved or even zoned multifamily in the city right now, which is why I think this conversation is very important.
Okay. Kevin, did you have something?
I had a comment. I'm looking at 2045. I'll be 83 years old. And what I notice about the apartments going in, I'm getting a little weeds here, but just something to think about. All these apartments that are going in, you see it everywhere, not just in Raymore. It's really set up for more younger people. And I don't see a lot of places that are more for the folks that want to get out of their house, getting something that's more maintenance-free. You know, we have Foxwood Springs, but Foxwood Springs is pretty old. I mean, they do update it. I've got an aunt out there, and she's got a beautiful apartment, I'd say that. But just wonder, you know, when you look at the multifamily, is there a way to have some like retirement type as well? I mean, can we put something like that in the master plan?
So we have one property that the council in a previous council, I don't remember the date that it was approved, but the property that's north of Price Chopper, that property is deed restricted, that it has to be a senior geared project. Obviously nothing there has developed, but we have seen some interest from, I'll call them the newer concepts of senior multifamily. I think Foxwood Springs, their apartments are 3 stories, and I'm sure there's elevators in there somewhere. But they are a little on the older side, obviously. We have never taken a project so far as to present it to the council for a number of reasons, but we have seen interest there of like what a new Foxwood Springs, I guess I'll say it, or a reimagined concept of that. But that could certainly be a policy of the city that we could look to implement. If we're going to do more than 1,000 apartments in the city, we would like a fraction of those to be, or a percentage of those to be for older adults only. That would align with our Community for All Ages plan that we have adopted. So I think that's definitely something we could explore.
Sonia?
Just kind of adding to that question and answer, some of the apartments we're getting have like walkout first floor apartments. So I like that idea that we could have, you know, some older people could choose that lower level apartment but still live in a place that's not just for people 55 and older. I think that's a great concept. I would definitely be in favor of that. And then I was just going to share that I pretty much agree with the mayor's assessment. I think the organic numbers look good. from what I hear from the community, if anything, that top line could be greater than or equal to, and that bottom line could be definitely less than or equal to. And again, I think with thinking about our community aging and your point you made about some of those, especially duplexes tend to be for older folks or looked more favorably upon by the community. I think the two-family units, as long as it didn't get too carried away, could be a little greater than or equal.
Yes, sir.
I guess this one kind of hits close to home because when I moved here, we noticed it, and that seems to be the topic. Everyone in Ward 1, almost everyone I talk to talks about apartments. We have 1,336 units in Ward 1 that I came up with. Now, I don't know some of the division of, like the venue, do those count as multifamily? But, you know, we've got the big units of 300, 396, 269. I mean, the numbers there, I kind of question that 1091 if we're counting Foxwood Springs as apartments as well. In addition, you have another 300 that's on the docket for Timber Trails, which could skew that number real quick to even a higher percent. In the previous meeting you had with parks and planning and zoning, this was kind of the hot topic when you got to this section. And you kind of talked about trade area capture in more detail, which I think is a very telling number for the future of our city. That, you know, that number, you have 24,000 residents at any given time, 18,000 are shopping in Raymore. So we're upside down right now with money staying in Raymore. More people spend money outside of Raymore. So if we continue to push population in our city, all we're doing is helping out surrounding cities with revenue, tax revenue at that point, but we're having to support more people. And then we get in things like, you know, how do we need more police officers and things like that? Obviously, with population growth, we have to add that in, but are we really getting, you know, the equal side of that? And that was kind of in the presentation earlier about businesses. I know at one point they talked about the good ranch area and they had soccer fields, and I'm thinking there's not a whole lot of tax revenue with soccer fields right next to an interstate. You know, that's not going to generate people coming in necessarily to stay here. And you know, to have restaurants, and you know, that's been the topic for conversation. We can't have one new sit-down restaurant because people will get bored with it. You know, once we even like a Johnny's, you know, a year later, you know, they're probably hitting a little bit of competition from the new place over in Belton. That, you know, is that hurting the tax revenue coming in from Johnny's because now they have a counterpart competitive restaurant across the highway. So I do, you know, concerned about, I think there is a right number. I agree with Sonia that most people I talk to want the single family higher, but in all reality, it's not really even about that. I think what we have here for a population base is probably exactly what we need until we get more entertainment infrastructure in. My neighbor had a son that was going to Missouri, was going to move back here, but decided not to because someone who's just out of college, there's no entertainment out here. You know, you either go down to Power and Light, or you go to Lee Summit, or maybe you go South Overland Park to go to like a restaurant or bar, or to go to an event. So I don't know if you attract a lot of younger people into apartments. I know that there's a need. You know, my young or oldest kids live in an apartment in Merriam, and the rent just keeps going up and up because people are developing around it. And that's what happens. The more you develop, the more the rent goes up. So they're considering moving out here, either to the Belton or Raymore side. You know, I've got my 2 cents where I want them to move to because I want them closer to me. But, you know, right now apartments are being built because people don't want the responsibility of property tax and everything else, yard keep and that. But I do believe, like, I know I spend a lot of money in Lowe's down the road. It's convenient, but because I have a single family home, I have to keep it up. Whereas, you know, one of the questions was, how much tax revenue do we actually capture from apartments? And I know every day when I go to work, about 5:45 in the morning, I'm going down Dean, getting on North Cass, and the number of cars coming off 549 going in the warehouses, it's like, almost like an ant farm. They're nonstop. So I don't know if the people working in the warehouses now, are they, you know, is there any way to determine, are these Raymore residents, or are we pulling from all over the metro now because perhaps it's a new company, new job, but are we capturing anything from those employees? You know, do they go to lunch in Raymore? There's, you know, a few options, but you know, that's kind of the concern with the apartment thing. I think looking at those numbers, you know, what I came up with here and what I see there, it's a little different. So I don't know, maybe it's just the timing of the study, maybe they didn't count. You know, maybe something wasn't open yet, like the depot, and that number didn't get counted in, but.
So the one thing that we did the market analysis, and that actually pulled information from the census. And so the numbers you're seeing here is actually from the inventory that staff has had dating back to 1996, I think. So I think and I mentioned Foxwood Springs, so there's numbers in there that are apartments, and there's some that are multifamily. So I think I'd be more than happy to sit down and kind of go through that data. Because that's why staff went with these numbers, because it is the data that we track from building permits and not the census, which isn't always, and there's always a margin of error there. But I can certainly get that information to the council if they're interested in kind of drilling down into that. I try to start putting that information in the monthly report of how, obviously as we issue permits each month, those numbers kind of change. And so if there's ever any information that our department can provide on the inventory that we have, this number does not include things that are not built yet. So the Timber Trails project was not included into this. The other thing that I can possibly share, it is a little bit outdated now, but in 2021, we did do a labor shed analysis of the city. And obviously the Commerce Center was not built yet, but it still looked at overall, where do Raymore's employees come from? And our labor shed goes as far as KCK down to the southern tip of Cass County. And those numbers are varied, obviously, based on the location. But we do have good relationships with those warehouses, and so I'm sure we can get some level of information on what's the commute, at least for your employees there. With numbers as large as those employers have, it is highly likely that a lot of those residents are coming outside of the city of Raymore, because we're typically a bedroom community. All of our residents go elsewhere for employment as well. But to your point on these numbers, I would be more than happy to sit down at a future work session or with a focus on housing and kind of walk through where all this information came from. But I appreciate your feedback.
Ms. Mills?
Kind of a follow-up, Councilman Baker mentioned, and I guess that's what I was trying to get to earlier about, you know, creating an identity and creating the things there as to where we don't necessarily need to get more people living there, but it becomes a place to where now we're getting people coming from other parts of the metro area to eat, to shop, to come to entertainment, the people that are working in the warehouses and things like that. Hey, here's stuff that we can do here. We don't have to go back home. And so I think it's real important to try to create that identity. And I think thereby the 49 corridor makes a lot of sense. And then when Councilman Barber's comment on the older adults, I totally agree. But I would like to add a caveat, and we're not talking about all of this being low-income older adults. We need some nice facilities for people that are wanting to retire and get out of their houses and things like that. So when we're looking at that, I just wanted to make sure, you know, we talked about all kinds of income levels, but it seems like a lot of times when we talk about older adults, we're talking about, you know, the more, you know, lower, and I don't think Councilman Barber was going that direction. I just wanted to.
Thinking about a Margaritaville.
Yeah, yeah. And on the older adults, any business, when you go to market, you look at what is your strength? What do you have that other communities don't have? And right now with Cass County, we've got this freeze on property tax for older adults. And if you go over, like I say, I'm in Medicare and I've got all kinds of customers, and especially, man, you go over in Olathe and South Overland Park and those areas, they've built these beautiful communities that have anywhere from 4 to 6, you know, they're attached, but they're 2,200, anywhere from 1,800 to 3,000 square feet, and they're not inexpensive. But a lot of people are selling their big houses and downsizing because it's all maintenance free and they don't have much yard and all that sort of thing. And to me, there's no city in all of Cass County that has the ability to take advantage of that like Raymore does. because we've already have some of these things, and we have quality homes, and it's not like you're trying to put this here in an area that doesn't have that. And I feel like I wouldn't mind seeing, I mean, I definitely want to see I'd like seeing the apartment total smaller, but as far as multifamily units, if we were focusing on things like that, I think that would be a great opportunity, because these are the people that have money too. And they're the people that are gonna go to the restaurants and go to the things, because they've got that money. That's where that money is right now. And I think we've got a great opportunity. We should be marketing that. We should have a billboard on 49, Raymore's the place to retire to, property taxes, and find a developer to take advantage of that.
So I think it sounds like the discussion on housing, I think we've gotten a good temperature of kind of what the growth target looks like. I think there's different things to focus on within that discussion, maybe at a future work session or a follow-up to this. As Mr. Fearborn and I were talking this morning, it's not that this target has to be set in stone in order for this plan to be adopted, but as I mentioned early on, this is very much a living document, and the benefit of where we're at is that any new unit that gets approved or considered, the council has the final say in that and whether or not it meets the goals of what we're here to talk about, whether that's a senior project or a market rate apartment or a mixed-use community. I think the topic of housing is obviously important to everybody. That was a hot topic at our planning and zoning and park board meeting, and we've had a good discussion here tonight. So I think, we'll take some of that in consideration and maybe look at some of those greater than or equal tos and see how some of those numbers might be able to be moved around a little bit and figure out what that means. But if there's no more questions on housing, I think we're excited to get into the transportation conversation as well. So again, the thing that came out of our analysis of our transportation system is that it's pretty well already established. A lot of our roads have been built through neighborhood growth and or infrastructure projects through our capital improvement program or GeoBond projects that we've improved, at least under the strategic plan. So our major road network has been pretty well built out, at least within the bulk and kind of the core of the city. And so instead of focusing on where we can build new roads to promote development, the focus of this section really looks at how do we improve the safety of those corridors, the appearance of those corridors, the function of those major roads as they connect our commercial centers, our neighborhoods, our parks, and so forth. How can we take what we have right now and make it better versus building something new? And so we're looking at how can we assess the new development and better connect things through things like streetscaping and medians or lighting or sidewalk improvements, trail improvements, and so forth. And so within your plan, again, each of these different corridors has its own section within the plan, and we've identified some short and long-term ideas that the city can think about, with each of them, and then each of those different corridors kind of talks about the function of that road within the city. So for example, 58 traverses commercial and residential areas of the city, whereas Lucy Webb is primarily a residential collector. So you're going to do different things on each of those streets to improve it based on how it functions. We've had a lot of conversations about the flyover bridge, so that has an impact to Lucy Webb and how it functions moving forward. I've bolded North Madison Street, as you can see, because when we drafted this plan, the acquisition of land north of 155th up to 150 was not a possibility for us, and now it is. And so we bolded that because we need to go back and figure out what does that mean for the transportation plan, getting people into the city from that area of Lee Summit and kind of the South Casey area. But overall, this is kind of what we have identified as the major road network for the city. All of it's already built. What are ways through our capital projects can we continue to improve these corridors, whether it's an identity that we want to establish for each one of them, a program we want to establish to kind of look at different improvements to each section. So again, that's kind of the narrative that staff put together, and we're certainly open to any feedback. At the tail end of this section, you'll see some street improvements and some examples of what can be done to different roadways to improve things. So I'll give an example of that in the city would be on Lucy Webb. We built the pedestrian refuge island with the flashing beacons right there. That better connects Memorial Park to the trail that goes down to Recreation Park. So what other areas of the city can we be doing that? You see a lot of times in neighborhoods they do, they're called curb extensions here, but you delineate what is on-street parking from the road, and it slows cars down. So each of our different neighborhood streets functions differently than our arterials, and so most comprehensive plans look at when development happens, this road needs to be built here. We're fortunate that our network is pretty well built out with Ward Road and other projects kind of underway right now. So instead of focusing on more infrastructure, how do we improve what we have right now is really the focal point of the transportation plan under this comprehensive plan as opposed to the GMP. So I'll kind of pause with that because next we're going to get into parks unless the council has any specific comments on the transportation network.
Okay.
All right.
My turn? All right, thank you. Chapter 5 is the Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan, or the master plan, and the main goal throughout this whole process, it has been a goal for the Parks and Recreation Board for several years to have its own plan in place. The focus on that is to develop our park system, our trail system, everything from a proactive standpoint rather than a reactive standpoint. And what we have done has been very good and at a very high level, but it also has been very reactive. We get the property and then we go figure out what we're going to do with it. Or a street comes in and then we decide we're going to put a trail and route that. What we wanted this particular plan to do is set that site for 20 years down the road. So we are dictating what our park system looks like in 20 years. And with that, the main goal for myself and for the Parks and Recreation Board was that this was a plan of plans. This is a chapter that fits seamlessly into the comprehensive plan, but can be pulled out, function independently for the Parks and Recreation Board, and everything we do plugs right back into and coexist with the transportation plan and the development plan and how we dictate where parkland is coming from and fee and lieu and things like that. So our focus was to make sure that this is just a seamless document that can be pulled apart and work independently. And I think the Park Board is pleased with this, and which is why we're excited to present this to you tonight. The main thing for this particular evening's discussion is that this master plan for the parks system is based off an inventory system. We did an in-depth look at what we are, what we have, and what condition that it's in. And you'll see that the bulk of the document that here is an independent inventory of park land, each park independently. We break it down into different special use areas, miles of trails. We dictate what condition that it's in, what it should be in, and then we give recommendations of what we want it to be or how we want it to change. And that, in turn, turns into our 20-year CIP, which is what guides our budget process as well. The main goals that we want out of this particular master plan for the park system is, like I just said, the 20-year CIP. We want to be able to look 20 years ahead, program and budget and fund the things that we want, also become maintenance minded, and we have built a lot of things and they are going to age and be used, and we have to program maintaining those things at a high level or replacing them at some point. We want to look at funding a maintenance plan. We do have a maintenance plan, but that plan is outdated. It's based on what our park system looked like 10, 15 years ago, not what we look like today, which is very different from what we looked like even 5 years ago. And so we want to update that maintenance plan. It also includes a business plan, because in the past 5 to 6 years, we've included 2 indoor facilities that are revenue generating facilities, and we need to have a strong business plan that continues a revenue generation and pushes us towards a goal of 80 to 100% cost recovery. And what we want is that this particular master plan dictates that as a goal for us, to make sure that that gets implemented, and whether it's my staff or myself or the future staff, they're working towards those same things. And finally, something that's kind of important to me and my staff is that this guides us to become an accredited department. That's a high mark in the field of parks and recreation across the country. There's only 4 cities in the state of Missouri that have that. There's only just about 200 in the United States that are accredited. It's achievable, it's just hard to do. And we want to make sure that if we're going to claim ourselves as being a top-tier department, we want to hit that benchmark and prove it to everybody. So this master plan sets the stage and guides us towards working towards that accreditation. And when you work through this, it also, the inventory classifies our parks. So we have neighborhood parks and community parks. And well, I don't like to call them pocket parks. They're more small parks. But they all have functions and they have reasons. I mean, if you would look at it by definition of national standards, TB Hanna Station is a pocket park. It does not function as a pocket park. It is a destination park, and we have made sure that that is the case. And so within our plan here, we define what we want our park system to be, and we don't allow acreage or size of that area dictate what is going to be in there. If we're going to go big, we're going to go big, and I think TB Hanna is a prime example of doing that. Our trails plan, one of the things that our residents love about our park system is our trails, and we have a high amount of miles of trails, and we want to continue to increase that, highlight that, promote that, and be an identity for us. So our trails plan, we define the standards, and we really put in place what those trails are going to be, how they're going to be developed and built, and they function and flow within the transportation plan. That's what I was talking earlier about. What we do in the parks is seamless with what the transportation and public works. It all blends. So when a development comes through, those trigger mechanisms don't alienate one department. They trigger those checkpoints for each department, and we work together as a group to ensure that the overall master plan is getting followed. So we have some really good in-depth trail information for you to read and look through. And then finally, it also it dictates what we're going to do with our future plans and our future parks. And we have right now over 170 acres currently dedicated as future parkland. And that includes the 12 acres at Parkside, over 54 acres down at Good Parkway. We have concept plans in this document, and it shows what we would like to do with it. And that is the guiding mechanism for what we're going to do over the next 15, 20 years. The Good Parkway, the Ranch Park, is the next big thing for the Parks and Rec Department. And there's a very in-depth concept plan that the Park Board has been very invested in and guiding my staff on what to do with that, and that is in this plan. Now, by no means is that set in stone. That's what concept planning is. It's a concept idea. But the goal of this is to give us direction to go master plan that park, begin funding and finding mechanisms in how to develop that out. Ultimately, what we're proud of on this is that it sets the stage for what we get recognition for as being a high level, people are proud of our parks, they're proud of our trails, and what this does is that takes that, and we don't step back, we take that and we're moving forward to the next level and figuring out how to be the best of the best with the finally accreditation, and it gives the direction for our staff. So that is what the master plan that the Park and Recreation Board has tasked me with doing, and we feel like it flows fairly seamless within our comprehensive plan. So I know that's a quick overview after a very long meeting, and I am happy to answer any questions and always available to council anytime you want to talk more in depth.
Thanks, Dan. I know your park board is heavily involved in this and you've done a great job of getting them to provide you with their input as well on how to move forward with the park system. Pretty involved, got some good people there. You yourself have a great vision for the park system, so I'm working independent of this body. You guys have done a great job, I think, with our parks, and whatever we can do to help, when you let us know, okay? Does anybody else have anything for? Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, there's been some discussion you've heard here about having some things that bring people to Raymore. And obviously, our parks do that. I mean, we obviously for our own people, but we get a lot of folks. I drive by TV Hannah 3 or 4 times a day, and it draws a ton of people. Do you have, is there a way to get any data on how many people come from out of Raymore to our parks, and we have that? That'd be just interesting to know.
The council will remember you all approved that, our AI placer system within this budget, which we have activated and been using. And Mr. Mustine, why don't you go ahead and tell them how we used it last week?
So, as you know, one of our biggest events of the year is our Spirit of America, which brings what we have always claimed as a few thousand folks to Recreation Park. And that, we felt like that was a fairly lofty number. 2,500 folks at a Recreation Park seems like a lot of people. Last year, we funded Placer AI, and we were able to backtrack previous years and based on the information, because it's all cell phone data and things like that. So our event was last Friday night, and we were, as early as this morning, were able to get a very valid number of cell phones, not necessarily people, but people, are equivalent to a phone. And we were able to document between 4 p.m. and midnight within the boundaries of Recreation and Moon Valley Park, the 89 acres there. There were 4,600 folks that came into Recreation Park on Friday night. That is with the closing of the grass parking. We ended up closing over 500 parking spots that we would typically get due to the rain, because we didn't want to tear up our fields. So when it's kind of the National Lampoon's Vacation is parks closed, folks. Sorry, you missed the sign out front. We did that, and so we were significantly lower. And even with that closed parking, our number last year was 5,400 folks. And so we had a really good showing. That's just within the boundaries of Recreation Park. That doesn't include the church across the street and the hundreds of folks that were lined up on the trail along Madison that did not breach our boundaries. So the next report that we're doing are the ones in your neighborhood, a 1 mile radius of Recreation Park. We're figuring out those numbers and going to do a comparison, because it's typically the nature of the way our city is set up is that you can park in the neighborhoods and walk to the park, or the way our show is designed is you can sit in your car and see the show from almost anywhere in the city. You don't have to be in there. So we have a really good attendance to our events, and this program actually will help show what we have in terms of the rest of the area. We can take that information and find out where they came from, where they went after the show, whether they went home or they went to Johnny's or they went to wherever the case may be, because we're tracking cell phone data. And so we have that at our disposal now.
So does that tell you who are residents and who are non-residents?
Yes, the data on the phones can tell you where that bill is from, so you can. Now, obviously, that's sensitive in nature, and we don't gather that. We can just get information of residents versus non-residents. We don't get into that detail.
And you said that it was how much non-resident? How many non-residents?
I didn't break it down. I
Didn't
just
break
got
it down.
We haven't done that
The
breakdown.
overall
yet.
attendance, you haven't
overall
been able-
attendance.
okay.
Yes, sir.
Right. It'll be interesting though, because we
Yes.
do intend to use it for the warehouses as well, to find out where these folks going for lunch, are they staying there, what's going on with that, where are they going home to, where are they coming from. But it's going to be a valuable tool for all that sort of research.
Do you get any data on how many people are using VPNs, so you can't even know? Like, this says I'm in Ireland. You'll never find. I never go anywhere in
So-
public without the VPN running.
One of the things I think would be beneficial to share is the data that Mr. Mustine just talked about. It will gather it all into a heat map, and you can zoom out as far as you'd like, and it'll tell you there's going to be a bunch of little red dots in Lee Summit for people that came from Lee Summit. So it probably will capture people in Ireland. That's obviously not accurate in the case of you were probably here. But I think that heat map would be interesting. I literally just wrote down Placer II Commerce Center for Economic Development because I think that there's been enough data down there now to see they're coming from all over, I'm sure. When we first demoed this tool with Nathan and some other staff, we used Johnny's when it was under construction as an example. They dropped a pin on Johnny's, and there was people coming from way north of St. Joe. Obviously, there's contractors that are driving into town to build the building over there. So I think as a group, we can put together some, it's a tool that has so much functionality that it can be daunting. It can do a lot of things. You can spend a lot of time trying to play with it. But I think it'd be beneficial from the parks perspective and maybe a development perspective, to choose a couple points to drop down. It also does traffic counts that we've been trying to kind of play with a little bit. So I think it'd be beneficial for us to put together some examples and share those with the council here in the near future.
Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it was extraordinary. We went, and didn't know the weather, and that was a big scare. I know the 46, I think it had been calling for clear weather. I think you had exceeded last year's numbers. Especially the way you set it up this year with all the food trucks on the one side. You had to balance it. You guys did a great job setting that up this year that it actually got max out of it. And I'm thinking, we were there, went well. It was perfect and beautiful. And so I'm thinking if that weather had been called for a nice night, you would have probably got more than 5,400. I think they would all came out, and it would have been a real good crowd. I think the weather forecast. But the mayor is he's in charge of the weather, and somehow he made it work. Had the fireworks, and the rain didn't hit until about maybe 15, 20 minutes after, and everybody, I think, got home and back to their homes and cars. So it drug out perfectly, so it worked out really good. But it was a good night, but I think you just lost a lot because of the weather.
Mr. Mills, do you have something?
You talked about, we're able to monetize like the rack and Centerview and generate revenue. Has there been discussion about monetizing our outside parks, such as like sponsorships, like with the amphitheater or the trails or certain events, to getting corporate sponsorships and things like that to generate revenue to help with maintenance and things like that?
Actually, yes, and I think what you're going to find over the next couple of years, you're going to see an increase of that. This Placer AI provides us information that we can go to those businesses. For example, last year when we were working with Placer AI before we purchased the program, they were giving us examples of Recreation Park. We picked the weekend of the soccer tournament at the end, and we were able to tell where folks were coming from, staying at the park, and where they went afterwards. And most of them were coming from Walmart, going to the park and hitting McDonald's, Subway, and Wendy's, And so we're able to take that information, go to those folks, those businesses, and say, this is where people are coming after they leave us. Let's get them there even in numbers and use those things. So you're going to see a more concerted effort towards sponsorships. That also includes advertise picnic shelters, rentals, and things like that. Because a lot of what we have done in the past is pretty much come to us, and not us going out saying, "Look what we can do for you." It's just, we're here, you come to us, and so that mentality is going to shift, and part of that recreation business plan will dictate how that works.
Anybody else have anything? Did you want to wrap it up, Mr.
Thank you, sir. For the first time, what is being presented to the council tonight is a truly comprehensive plan. And for those of you who were here 4 years ago, you'll remember what we wanted to do was not have plans in isolation. And we did experience times, rare, but there were times where one plan would be in conflict with another one. And so what this process, even though it has been very long, what this process has done is it has allowed us to review all of the plans, even the ones that are incorporated into this, like the transportation plan, like the stormwater plan, the wastewater plan, the water plan, all of these plans that we have for the city were referenced in here and are incorporated by virtue of. The reason it's presented in this particular format is the streets plan, the wastewater plan, all of those support our vertical. And what you see in here in detail is the vertical aspect that those plans support that would necessarily, those plans don't need to be, we don't need literally the Encyclopedia Britannica for the plan. What we need is, this is the visible component of what all those would be contributing to the parks as they're going in and future development, anything that's vertical. And so that's the separation you see in the presentation tonight, is they're there, they're part of the plan, but they're here to support what you see here. That concludes staff reports tonight, sir.
Thank you, sir. Anyone have any additional questions before we close? No need to go to executive session? All right. Well, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.